But
It was one. It was wonderful to talk to Bill. We had a really long oral history interview time together. And one story he talked to me about was when the fish ladders first opened right at the Pierce Mill. Fish ladders, so for people, the park has herring that travels back from the ocean, back up the creek to spawn. And there have been barriers over the years that have kept them from being able to go to their traditional spawning grounds. And took a long time, a lot of studies, a lot of work to finally build these fish ladders that are like stone steps that have pools in each of them so that the fish literally jump a little bit each time to get over the larger barrier. And there's one at Pierce Mill. And Bill was describing to me the whole process of getting the fish ladders done and the importance of it. And then he just looked at me and he said, and then that one day when we opened the fish ladder for the first time, you actually saw the fish go through the ladder. And it was just, he said, tears came to my eyes. It was just amazing to see it actually happen and work. And it's stories like that that I love that connection when doing the interviews, and I try to make that also come out in the book. So he was great to talk to.
well, you did a great job in that regard. Um,
Thank you.
you're welcome. So, you were talking about the fact that one of your charges in writing this is that it helps us leaders of the park make better decisions. And I'm I'm thinking about, again, I've referenced this before, all the small decisions that go into the larger decisions. We were talking previously about your ability to kind of capture that and how something that I think all of us kind of think of as somewhat benign, definitely ubiquitous, how that has actually made your job a little bit harder, and that's email.
Mhm. One reason why I was able to focus upon Francis Wilson when I did the Manassas history was because I had this trove of correspondence that the Park Service had saved.
Mhm.
It's on onion paper. So when back in the day before you had photocopying and stuff, the secretaries would type up the letters on regular paper and then like two or three onion pieces of paper underneath. And that would be the copies that they would keep for their files. And because of wonderful archivists everywhere and wonderful policies about saving records in the federal government, the those onion pages have been saved, and I can go to the National Archives, I can go to the parks and find them and uncover these wonderful stories about the decisions being made about different issues in the parks. Well, for various reasons, the correspondence files for parks in the basically from year 2000 on are slim to none because of email. Some people, a few people have saved their emails either digitally or even printed them out, and I've been thankful for that. But systems have changed, and the systems sometimes don't even let people save emails for longer than a certain time period. And so much email communication has been lost or filed in a way that I've never been able to uncover it. And that whole source of information for writing these histories is therefore not there. And it stymies my ability to tell some of these stories, and it elevates the reason for doing oral history interviews, because the oral history interviews will give me some insights into why a superintendent made a decision that he or she made and why community members wanted to have the park act in a certain way. So I get some of it from the oral history interviews, but it's not exactly the same as having that correspondence as a documentation for getting the larger story behind issues and how decisions were made.
Thank you for that. Um, so you referenced Manassas and some of the rich history there that you uncovered when you were doing the administrative history. Um, can you compare what you uncovered in your work here at Rock Creek with, say, one of the another park or some of the other parks that you've gone and done administrative histories for? Where do we sit in that ecosystem of best park ever? Oh my God, what are they doing? Um,
There's definitely themes that go across the parks. Um, the transportation in terms of its impact upon parks is huge. Parks end up having roads get widened, roads become heavy commuter routes, roads that want to be built through parks. And so transportation is a huge issue for parks, no matter, you know, for areas that may have once been rural but have become more suburbanized
mhm,
with time. Not, Rock Creek Park obviously is in DC, but places like Manassas or Fredericksburg or um, things like that. So transportation is an issue. Uh, how parks have addressed interpretation has been common because the Park Service has responded to social changes, and so that has been reflected in interpretation. For example, 1970s, 1960s had a big, strong environmental push. So even for historic parks, you had environmental aspects to an interpretation in those parks.
mhm,
And then moving forward into more recent periods, you have the parks responding to curriculum and school standards and things like that. So the parks have had to revamp their interpretation in order to meet school standards and school um, curriculum requirements in order to make it so that they are relevant to the students and the teachers wanting to take them to the parks. And so the interpretation has shifted for that reason. And in some ways, interpretation has shifted also based upon transportation, because as it gets more difficult, for instance, for people to get to certain places, then parks have had to think of creative ways to tell those stories, either turning that story into something that's told at a visitor center, for example, as opposed to on the ground, or having waysides tell the story as opposed to a ranger standing there and trying to tell it to the people who come over. So interpretation is one thing that has changed with time. And let's see, the issue of urban sprawl has been a common one in other parks, but since Rock Creek is an urban area, that's not necessarily something that's common, except of course that the transportation issue has been a big factor for the park.
what was most surprising for you when you did the research on Rock Creek? What was it?
Brian,
Yes.
I just need to interrupt for a second. Joan did not directly answer whether or not Rock Creek is the best park ever.
Oh, well,
I'm
I-
gonna need you to
You
answer.
know, it is the best park because
right. Thank you.
because it has this ready group of people who live right here who can use it and are using it on a regular basis. And visitors who come to, say, Georgetown, and they're walking right past the old stone house, for instance, and don't even realize that first, it's a National Park Service site, and second, it's the oldest house in its original foundations in Washington, D.C.
mhm.
So, there's things like that. And the Civil War defenses of Washington. So I have to admit, when I started working on the Rock Creek Park history, I didn't really register what Civil War defenses were and had really not paid any attention to them. So of course, when I started writing about it, I was like, wow, this is really cool stuff. And of course, it makes perfect sense that there had to be these defenses during the Civil War. And there was actually an attack by Jubal Early and the Confederates onto Washington, and they worked. The Civil War defenses worked. They repelled the Confederates and saved the nation's capital from being taken. So there's lots of things about Rock Creek Park that make it so interesting and a place where all different people of all different interests can sort of pocket their interest into some aspect of that park. And that's the 99 units, not just reservation 339. You can just, it's so much stuff that you can do. Did that answer it, Jeannie?
You did us proud there, Joan. I appreciate it.
Okay, good.
You know, you know, when you reference all those different pieces, so one of the things that was most surprising for me, so I'm a Washingtonian, and there are any number of these places that I've been walking past, through, around, over my whole life and had no concept of. So I was born at Walter Reed Hospital. The shot that was taken on Abraham Lincoln came from that far in the courtyard the old courtyard where you would enter into the hospital gates previously by an old tree. Those sorts of stories. I don't know how many times I walked past Battle Ground National Cemetery. As a historian, it became very interesting, the numbers of different types of stories you could tell walking through Rock Creek Park. And then as I will say, as I've matured and start to develop a greater sense of appreciation for nature, the idea that you have this green, you know, chestnut leaf in the middle of the city, great beating green heart of the city, is huge. It's an amazing feat. It's an amazing opportunity. I was reading through your administrative history, and it was talking about the founding of some of the organizations who've been around to help support Rock Creek Forest previously, and now Rock Creek Conservancy. But it gets to the question, not to the question, but the point you made about superintendents and their decision making. And you know, Jim Redmond was somebody who was very focused on protection of natural resources, so very supportive of all these groups that were like, yes, to do work in the park. Yes, we want to preserve the waterways. Yes, we want to help out and do invasive removals and things of that nature. And I do think that one of the things that I see when I look at the administrative history is that it gives me actually more latitude to say yes to things. That is said, that it allows me to say, why shouldn't we allow this group to do X and Y in this neighborhood, right? Why shouldn't we consider doing this sort of programming versus different programming? Why not? Why not? I mean, the worst thing that could happen is it doesn't work, and then we stop doing it and we try something else, right? But there is something to be said for being open to saying yes to some of these different things. And it's very hard. And it's always been very hard in the organization because, you know, if you give people an inch, they'll take a mile, right? That's the idea. Like, you know, you can't just allow people to do whatever they want. It's like, no, but you can trust that if you have good relations with people. And I think that's one of the things that pop up periodically in the administrative history is a question like, what are the relationships that the park staff have with the community? Because that makes all the difference in the world in regard to what you can ask for help on, where you can ask for people to maybe direct their energies in one direction or another. What does it mean to have those relationships, and how that plays out? And since a lot of the stuff has already been done, I don't have to make it up. Though I just do every now and then I do need to put a new coat of paint on it, and, you know, things of that nature. So that that to me, the biggest help of these documents, what they provide, in addition to just providing some really interesting information, backstory around what has happened previously in the park. And I want to be cognizant of time, and so I'm going to stop babbling here because I do have a couple more questions for you, Joan.
Well, can I just say, for one of the things that struck me about Rock Creek is all the different community groups, friends groups that have stepped in over the years to partner with the Park Service in various ways. And of course, Force and now Rock Creek Conservancy is one huge one. And I'm thrilled to be here tonight to share the admin history with all of you here. Friends of Pierce Mill, another huge group that made it possible for the Pierce Mill to run again and has done interpretive educational programs that have really made a difference for school kids, but also adults. That place has happened, quite honestly. And Meridian Hill, Friends of Meridian Hill, which is now Washington Parks Association or something
Washington
like
Parks and
that.
People.
Yeah, Washington Parks and People helped to turn that park around. That was really abandoned in some ways to drugs and crime. And Steve Coleman there helped to reinvigorate it, brought in the community members to turn it into a place that people felt safe going to again. And I'm going to forget other friends groups I know, but there's been so many that have just made a difference for the little niches that they became interested in and working with the Park Service for. And of course, Rock Creek Conservancy has become something beyond just Reservation 339, which has been wonderful.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning Prince of Pierce Mill. Actually, one of my earliest experiences with a Rock Creek as an adult and working for the Park Service was a friend of mine. Her dad was Richard Abbott, and
Oh,
she reached out to me and said, "Hey, is there any chance you could get him an introduction to the chief of resource management at the park," which I was able to do, not knowing what I was getting into, and not knowing that eventually this was going to lead to the work he winds up doing, starting the Friends of Pierce Mill and all the good work, and that's, or being like a driving member of the Friends of Pierce Mill and the work that they did to rehabilitate the mill and get it back online. Um, you know, I think there are probably more of those stories. Hey, I know a guy, or or I know you need to go talk to Miss So and So. That person can really help you with X, and then leads to this broader involvement in an organization with the park, maybe even career choices that wind up coming out of this. So,
we are in Washington, D.C., people know people.
well, and so this is one of the things I also realize, and I try to keep in mind when I talk about what Rock Creek Park is. Like, I used to work at the National Mall, some of you may know, and I used to say I had 535 members of my congressional delegation. Well, in Washington, D.C., I only had one member of my congressional delegation. However, I have a staff of about 2.2 million people in that who work for that congressional delegation, remind me regularly of what needs to be done and what it is the park is doing, not doing, and where it could be better. You know, it's a humbling day when sit down and have a cup of coffee and try to share information about your park, and you realize that person was responsible for writing a piece of legislation related to it. And it's like, oh, okay, well, but I digress. Anyway, one more question, and then I know we need to open it up for other people to talk other than us. If you had to tie Rock Creek's administrative history up in succinctly, what would be your theme?
My theme?
Yes. I mean, you gave it a wonderful title,
Mhm. Thank you.
Urban Oasis. So how would you flesh that out?
Well, the title of the administrative history is Urban Oasis. And I chose that because I wanted to, of course, reiterate that it is an urban park and that the Oasis idea is that not just referencing for Reservation 339, the Central Rock Creek Park aspect, but also Oasis in terms of Georgetown Waterfront Park, which has the wonderful water features there and places to sit, places on the grass to go, kids running around. Um, you can do yoga there on summer weekends. I mean, it's a great place to go hang out, and people walk it just walking along the Potomac River. They end up on Georgetown Waterfront Park. So that's an oasis. Uh, you can go to Meridian Hill Park, of course, and sit and look at the fountain there or at the Joan of Arc statue.
Mhm.
You can admire the architectural uh, beauty of that place and the really distinctive use of concrete that was it's an aggregate type of concrete that was used for that park
One of the
that
first large-scale uses of aggregate concrete in the world.
yeah, yep. So there's that aspect as an oasis. And so I just wanted to use that term because the park's 99 management units are all have possibilities, I guess, to be an oasis in a broadly administered way.
Well, thank you, Joan. I appreciate that. Appreciate your
Mhm.
taking the time and kind of talking us through what an administrative history is, how it compares with how the one for Rock Creek compares with others, and it's very clear your passion for the work and more importantly for the world's best park. So, so,
I
so
do
thank you very
appreciate that we
much.
got that on the record. And Joan, love the idea that the theme is Rock Creek as an urban and oasis. Rock Creek Conservancy as the Friends group, the philanthropic partner to the entirety of Rock Creek Park's mission is to restore Rock Creek and its parklands as a natural oasis for all people. It's an urban natural oasis, I suppose. And I do want to recognize, you gave a lovely shout out to the Friends of Pierce Mill. I see Angela Kramer, their executive director, is with us tonight. I think a few of our board members at the Conservancy, and I'm sure there are others, including several of the Weed Warriors, who are some of the more active volunteers in Rock Creek, are here tonight. So both of you pointed out the way in which so many people have had such a hand in the shape of the park over the years and have such a vested interest in that. I apologize if I ask these questions out of order. For those of you who very kindly put them in the chat, please keep them coming. I'm going to just knock a few out real quick. One person wanted to know, when will we see fish in the creek again?
In the spring,
There you go.
there'll be
So-
alewife and other things making their way upstream.
So to expand upon that, Brian, there are plenty of fish in the creek right now. The ladder is working, and the anadromous fish that come in the spring will be there in the spring. And it is really fabulous if you're out at Pierce Mill and have a chance to see the fish ladder when the herring are running. It's like a little silver race up the stream. We also had a question about when the second floor of the old stone house will be open again.
So we have worked on an interpretive plan for that space. The second floor is not intended it's not load sensitive enough to be able to have tons of people going up there. So we're trying to work on a way to be able to allow people to go into the second floor. And take a look, but it may not be filled with furnishings and things the way we have in the past, and maybe a different sort. We may look at a different model to allow for people to be in the space simultaneously, to be sensitive to the care of the structure as it's moving forward. I will say that anybody who's spending time with me knows we've been talking about our rebuilding our interpretive staff, and so we've just made one of our more critical hires this week, or at least made an offer on one of our more critical hires. So I anticipate in the spring and the summer this year, we'll start seeing a little bit more activity at all of our visitor contact areas, because we'll have more staffing, and part of one of the first things I have on my list for the new program manager for interpretation, education, and community outreach is the old Stone House, just because it's such a critical location in Georgetown, and with the 250th anniversary of signing the Declaration of Independence coming up in just a couple of years. Would be nice to have that open and have that as a location for people to come through and really kind of get a sense for Washington at that time period. I don't think people really think of the idea that DC is a 200-plus-year-old city, but it is.
Thanks, Brian. And we had a question about where can people find information about Rock Creek Park?
We have a fair amount of information under our history section on the website. So Joan's work, part of the work of Barry McIntosh, our stewardship, our resource management stewardship plan. A lot of our planning documents are available through the website. We do have smaller pieces that you can come visit me at the Klingel Mansion, and be happy to share with you some of the other materials that we have. But most of it you'll be able to find there. Some of it, I'm trying to remember. Library of Congress, I know carries some of it, but that might be a much heavier lift.
Fair enough.
Right.
Maybe either you or I think I see Kyle from your staff could put a link to the best part of the park's website for folks into the chat, if you'd be so kind. And while you're doing that, I'll ask a question that I think may be better addressed by Joan. So there were a couple of people that said, this program is called Race History in Rock Creek. What does this administrative history have to do with race? Like, what are we talking about here? Please discuss.
So I talk about the issue of segregation largely as it relates to Rock Creek Park and its different administrative units. So for instance, when Carter Barron was opened in 1950, the architect there had decided to make sure that it would be an open air auditorium, because then, based upon practice in DC at the time, it would not have to be segregated because it was open air. So that's one example of, I guess the larger statement would be that the District of Columbia was a segregated city. The National Park Service is a federal agency, and it, from 1941 on, was told, no, you're not going to be having segregation at your facilities. Within the South, the Park Service still did do segregation as a way to deal with the South, basically. But in the district, there was this kind of give and take situation in which the Park Service tried very hard to be non-segregated, but had to come up against the DC city ways of doing things, I guess. And so that was one example with Carter Barron. With Rock Creek Park proper, there were segregated picnic areas. The Park Service had the golf course in Rock Creek Park that was segregated when originally was established. So there's these little bits and pieces of racial history based upon segregation that I talk about in the history. And then there's displacement. So Meridian Hill Park when it was first established, was put in a place where there was a thriving African-American community. And they were driven out so that we could create Rooting Hill Park. So I talk a little bit about that. There's other histories that go further into this because I could not delve solely on race in my administrative history. There's too many other things I had to talk about, but I've inserted it into places that make sense to explain why decisions were made for Rock Creek Park in certain ways.
I definitely, as someone who's mostly read both administrative histories, yours definitely has it reads with a much franker tone than the original administrative history. It probably has a lot to do with when that was written as compared to yours.
Mhm,
Brian, do you want to
mhm.
add anything to that?
Yeah, I would say, one of the things about race in Washington, D.C. is that it plays out on landscape. So if you think about the park and you think about how people access the park, where people have most access on foot, by bike path, by vehicle, it's all on the western side mostly. Accessing from the east side, which had traditionally been lower income, more mixed race in Washington, you don't have that portion of the town does not have the same access to that green space. And in many ways, the Carter Barron in its, creating an open air amphitheater and creating, a way to have people kind of together without having them together, serves as a gateway, along with the recreation area there at Brightwood. It serves as a gateway and an entrance point to Rock Creek. I would also point out, I know some of you have probably seen some of these other race history in Rock Creeks, and therefore you're familiar with the Reno City. That was at the site of where Fort Reno is now. It was a mixed race community. And as the commissioners of Washington, D.C. made decisions about how they wanted Ward 3, what is now Ward 3 to be, what they want the ethnic makeup of it to be, they decided that they did not want a predominantly mixed race community in that area, and essentially ran those folks out through, using the political process, and ultimately moved those folks out. And I mean, and part of what we have there is, the archaeological remains of the fort there currently, but also we have, as a result, a very segregated section of the town that coincidentally has all the access to the green space, the largest green space in Washington in many ways. And when you think about the impacts on people and the impacts on the city, that having something like the Rock Creek Park, all the green space in the water, the way it reduces the temperature, in those areas, it's not a heat in the middle of the heat island. You had this big cool green space. More people from the other areas of the town, which are not necessarily as developed and as densely populated as the eastern side of the town, have access to that space. And that plays into how people view nature, how they view recreation, how they understand their place in the world and what it looks like. And in the ways that we talk about the city are talked about using Rock Creek as very much as a dividing line. That has been the case for the longest time. And a lot of the work that my predecessor, Julia Washburn and Tara Morrison and others have been trying to do is break that down. But some of that is tied to the geography, and some of that is tied to choices made for how roads were developed and brought into the park. And we're doing a lot of work to try to fix that. But it's one step at a time. So it's everything from the Piney Branch Trail being, going from being a social trail to being actually formalized, to the study we're doing over at Military Road about creating the east-west passageway with a hiker-biker trail that runs along Military Road to move people into the park. Those sorts of things are the ways we see to try to counteract what the choices that were made 100 or so years ago. So
Thanks.
Yeah, and I think also to say that access on the eastern side of Rock Creek Park Reservation 339, it's not just car access, but it's also foot traffic, people who don't own cars and finding ways for them to get in. And so I did an interview with one of the park staff who talked about how, and I don't know if this is still there, Brian, but having the bike share program from DC, have that connected into where the nature center is as a way to make it so that people who get off a bus can then take a bike the rest of the way into the park to get into the nature center and to go further to explore. So there's been ways the Park Service has been trying to use a whole range of different options for getting that access for people beyond just cars, things like that.
And
And
I'll
that's a
also,
movement throughout the
no,
city as well, micromodal transportation to directly to directly try to counteract many of the choices that have been made about who gets access to places and how they get access. So
I was just going to add, I think it happened after the administrative history was done being written, but the multi-use trail along Piney Branch is a really nice addition, and one that's designed for people and bikes, not just for cars. That is added to that eastern expansion, Brian, to your point about the park's priorities. Since you both mentioned it, I'll ask this question next. Paraphrasing, why isn't the Carter Barron a higher priority given its importance in history, the renovation of the Carter Barron? Maybe Joan wants to talk a little bit about the importance in history, and Brian wants to talk about its prioritization.
sure.
Carter Barron, I think, opened in 1950. It was has developed over time in terms of what kinds of entertainment it has offered over the years. Had a colonial type of play done when it first opened, moved on into doing music, and the music changed over time from classical and opera to more popular pieces and rock and roll and things like that. Then eventually had the Shakespeare Theater putting on the free for all, I guess, for several years. Not having it open for so many years now, I miss it. It would be great to have it back. It's a great place to go hang out. So then I'll turn it over to you, Brian, and say, yes, we're going to be working on it. We are working on it.
So we are working on it. We have been working on a schematic design for the rehabilitation of the Carter Barron, looking at multiple options, including possibly covering the house. We need to factor in everything from how do we, without greatly disturbing the current footprint, create a modern theater space. And also we have a handful of endangered species that literally live right behind the park. Michigan roosting trees for the northern long-eared bat, the Indiana bat, tricolor bat, the Hay amphipod that lives in the seeps, in the freshwater seeps down in the park. All those things that go into a lot of our design work. So it's been very intentional, the design work we have done, and it's taken a while because it's been iterative. We started out with the idea we're just going to fix the stage. And then it's like, well, maybe we need to look at more than the stage. And then, it's one of those things, if you've ever done a renovation in your home, I was just going to, replace the bathroom in the basement. And next thing you know, you have a whole new basement and you put a second story on your house. Because once you're in there and start doing things, you might as well go ahead and do it all at the same time. So we're trying to front load that with our design work. In regard to priorities for the park, it is a line item construction project. We compete with every other park in the park system for line item construction dollars. A lot of the work that you've been hearing about the last few years with the Great America Outdoors Act and things of that are really directed at deferred maintenance projects, and those projects have been priority. This is a deferred maintenance project. It is the park's #1 priority. This is some work we're doing down in Georgetown around the seawalls there. These are our two biggest priorities. but like I said, we compete against other we compete against other parks, and GWP just had George Washington Memorial Parkway just had to work on the Claire Martin Parkway. Yellowstone is having a water treatment center done. So getting in line and trying to elbow our way to the front, we're working as much as possible. So where we have control over the process is finishing the schematic design. We are also fortunate enough to have a group called the Carter Barron Alliance that has been out advocating for reminding people and raising funds on behalf of the Park Service for the moment when we get through the schematic and start to move towards construction documents. So their goal is to raise enough money to cover the construction documents so that we will be shovel ready at the point where we get the money from the Park Service to finish this project. And part of that is also that we're in conversation with the city of Washington, D.C. That has a great interest in seeing the Carter Barron reopen. It is a cultural institution. It is a place of memory for so many people. And the idea that we could partner with the city and bring it back online and be able to get back to a more robust production season would be that's the goal for us in the park. That is the goal for our regional office. So it is a huge priority. The amount of time, energy, and resources we spend talking about trying to move things around, trying to keep it at the top of other people's list, so that to remind them that it is always at the top of our list, is a task unto itself. So, but yeah, our hope is that we'll finish our piece with the schematic this year, sometime summer this year, and then move forward start moving towards getting construction documents, doing all the compliance and things that need to happen. So it's a couple of years out, but we're moving forward with it.
Thanks, Brian. And I'll say on behalf of the Conservancy, if anyone would like to help make that go a little faster, would be happy to talk to you about what a transformative gift looks like. And the Carter Barron Alliance, which is a program of the Conservancy, I put a link in the chat. We did a great program as part of this series last fall with DC Jazz Fest about the history of jazz at the Carter Barron. We've done a few other programs on the topic as well. And we'll be out there with a DJ and lawn games and picnic suppers in June. I think every Thursday in June, we'll be out there having a lot of fun, and we hope to see all of you there at Summer in the Parks. We had a question, actually, two different people asked about, like, why is there a golf course in Rock Creek Park and what's going on there? And maybe you could a little bit more broadly talk about the Olmsted plan.
Yes, in I believe 1918, the Olmsted brothers, Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. and his, I guess, half brother John, put together a report for the
You just muted yourself, Joan. Just when you were getting to the good stuff.
Oh, sorry. They put together a report at the request of the park to sort of lay out a vision for the landscape architecture of the park and the uses of the park. And they looked at the topography and labeled certain areas that this should stay woodland, this is meadow, this is areas for active recreation, these are areas for passive recreation, these are trails that need to be developed more, these are bridle trails that need to be worked on, things like that. And there was one area, which is the area where we have this golf course that they said, this is a great place for this kind of recreation. And, I said where ball fields should be and things like that. But they were also, I should say, going back to the idea of access and stuff, they were very adamant in talking about Rock Creek Park and saying that there should be access for everyone. It should not just be for rich people to be able to go there, that it should be for the all different classes of people to go there. They never talk about race when they were referring to that, but I would assume that if they're talking about all different classes, and they specifically said for poor people, that they were talking about mixed race. So the the Olmsted brothers were trying to imagine Rock Creek Park as a place where all different people could get the benefits of being in nature, being in an open space, having recreational opportunities of a whole range available to them. And they, at the time, streetcar lines were defining access routes, and so they were trying to imagine the park based upon where these streetcar lines were going to be intersecting, and talking about the ways in which the areas could benefit from streetcar lines to bring people in certain areas. So as a result of that, there's also a group of people who in the early 20th century was talking about golfing and having a golf course in Rock Creek Park, and that eventually developed. I'm not good on the date on the golf course, so I apologize for that, but it had a start
1922.
in the night. Okay. Had a start, and then they had a Scottish designer come in to design the course, and it has gone through various iterations since then. I guess is the best way to summarize that.
Brian, do you want to add anything?
So the golf course in many ways, Rock Creek Golf Courses functions as part of a tripart system in the city. There are two of the golf courses that the Park Service owns. There's East Potomac Park, one down along the Washington Channel and in the Potomac River, and then there's Langston. Rock Creek Park Golf Course has always been a little bit. It's a woodland style course by William Flynn. It is intended to be sort of a more rough and ready course for people. The work that we are doing currently with the National Links Trust, they have a lease to actually rehabilitate all three golf courses, and they decided that the one that needed the most love and needed the most attention soonest was the one in Rock Creek. So it also presents the most challenges because whereas with Langston to a great extent and with East Potomac to a large extent, that area was just cleared. I mean, East Potomac was filled at one point, and they laid the golf course on top of it. So because of the forest, because of the woodland nature of the golf course, this has created a great challenge in regard to rehabilitating. And actually, a lot of the work that we're undergoing right now is to try to get the 9 holes, get a 9-hole course that's playable again. We've actually reduced the number of holes that are there currently to really provide some meadow, provide some pollinator space, keep what has become, a nice space for birders. Joan mentioned earlier that birding is very popular in Rock Creek Park. This is the area that sees a lot of birding. Trails, eco trails and things of that nature. So I think the biggest thing with the golf courses is that, you have to think you should think of the golf course not as a place where people go whack balls, but think of it as cultural landscape, right? This is a design, this woodland design this is one of the premier golf designers of the early part of the 20th century. I'm not going to say it's the same, but bear with me here. Remember, I'm a preservationist in my previous life. If you talk about the MLK library and the fact is the Mies van der Rohe building, that has a lot of weight to why you decide to retain it and rehabilitate it. William Flynn was a big name in golf. We have this golf course. The golf course wasn't going anywhere. Trying to rehabilitate it to the standards of which made it look playable the way that William Flynn is important as a cultural landscape as it is important as a recreational opportunity for the city. And we do have people who regularly go to that golf course and, get on the putting green and make their way around. And we periodically have, other folks doing other sorts of things there. And we see that as being potentially a good opportunity to create a third space in the community that's accessible from the east side, that is walkable to a sizable portion of that population. And that provides all of that urban oasis uh, that Joan and Jeannie have talked about here for some people. That everyone's interested in golf, but you know, maybe you'll pick it up. Maybe you'll change your mind.
To make a golf pun, different strokes for different folks.
There we go.
There you go. I'll be here all night. I really appreciate that, Brian. You know, you mentioned you come to this naturalistic park as a preservationist, a historian, and I come as a natural resources person to this concept of cultural landscapes. And I was really struck. I don't know if it's specifically in the administrative history or if it's in the cultural resource study specifically about the golf course, but about the like the invention of the weekend and you know, the opportunity for working class people to have leisure time, and how that led to this run of the development of public golf courses that were more accessible rather than just the private courses that I had, you know, I never would have contemplated that before, you know, all the decisions about the golf course were coming up. And it just strikes me that that's what the administrative history and sort of related documents are just meant to do, you know, is to give you some context and help understand, you know, for those of us that walk in and think like, this should obviously be blah, to understand, oh, these very intentional decisions were made for reasons X, Y, and Z. And, but also, Joan, as I think your version of the administrative history does, to take a slightly critical appraisal and say, well, who wasn't at the table when that decision was being made? And, you know, do we need to preserve that piece? I realize that's more complicated than what I just said. And maybe one thing that I could ask both of you to react to is someone asked about what we can learn from the Indigenous history in Rock Creek, which I know is not baked into the administrative history that you wrote, Joan, but I'm just curious how, Brian, that influences park management decisions, or you know, how it's been documented over time for the Park Service.
So we have well over 5,000 years worth of history from the Takachiking people, the Anacostan folks people. Unfortunately, because direct lineal descendants of those folks no longer exist, we wind up having to do a lot of tribal work, we choose to do a lot of work with different tribal entities in the area who have similar language and cultural backgrounds. I'll be frank. We are trying to do a better job of putting focus on that story. It's not as well documented as I think if you ask the resource staff or even the regional staff, it's not as well documented as it could be. DC becomes a very weird place in that regard, and that we wind up coming up upon a lot of different things. So as a matter of fact, it just been in conversations with our regional office, Native American Graves and Repatriation Act. We have the remnant of some artifacts that were found over the not Whitehaven, what is the, you know, the freeway is in Georgetown.
Whitehurst.
Yeah. So Stephen Potter, archaeologist for the region, did some work over there in the early 90s. Those remains are actually, and those cultural artifacts are actually, we're in the process of trying to repatriate them, return them to those communities. It's hard to hold on to these things when we know that they belong, that they have a home somewhere. We as the federal government have a responsibility to do a better job of researching and holding that information. But we are, I think, in urban areas like ours, it's really difficult just because the levels of sediment and development go down so far, and it's been unfortunately too long, and at a time when people didn't pay good attention to these sorts of things. That it makes it difficult. It's made it difficult for us to tell a fuller story, but we are trying to engage with tribes more and more in all of the work we do to make sure that that lens is put on any decisions we're making here in the greater DC area. And we think that as we do more and more of that, we will we will be the beneficiaries of a better understanding and more and greater appreciation, and more importantly, possibly more information about how the resources have been used, how people view the resources. Um, I was thinking really quick, and I'm going to shut up, Jeannie, I promise. Just thinking really
Your
quickly
park.
about the long walk that took place in 1972, the different Native American peoples who walked across country to come to the White House. Before they went to the White House, they walked up to Meridian Hill. And they went to Meridian Hill because they recognized that as being sacred ground from the King people as well. And went and had a ceremony there before they then walked back down 16th Street to the White House to meet with the president, I think Nixon at the time, and address their grievances. So just because we do not know better or do not know a great deal about what is here and need to do better, there are people who do, and we need to be better about listening to them.
Thanks, Brian, and we look forward to sharing some of those stories at future episodes of this program, for sure. Joan, do you want to add anything, or?
The archaeological record has the park has done various archaeological studies along Rock Creek, and there's definite evidence of indigenous peoples there, and it's great that the park is now working to make those stories told and incorporated into the larger story of the park. Yeah, it wasn't an emphasis at all for my Friday Day Event history, so can't add much more.
And we are not throwing softballs here, even as we get close to the end of the hour. The next question that we haven't answered yet is, do you think minorities were intentionally excluded from Easy Park access? Brian, you talked a little bit about the differential access on different sides of the park.
Yeah, I think it was made easier for the communities that the park was targeting as their core audience. I'll say that.
And
I
that's
think
all.
that, yeah, Brian mentioned just really briefly the idea of geography. The East Side has some formidable barriers, physical barriers, but there's ways around things, and when there's a will, there's a way kind of thing, and yet there wasn't. So
Mhm.
yes,
Yeah.
I'm sure it was intentional.
And we have and I can find the links to the recordings of those. We have had a few conversations about not National Park Service actions, but the ways in which land use officials, city officials use the park to separate communities as well, which is a slightly different question than what was asked. Excellent. We had a question about, I heard a Black woman owned a restaurant concession at Pierce Mill. Fact or fiction?
I believe,
She didn't own it, but she rented the space.
Yeah.
Yeah, for the tea house.
yeah, Hattie Sewell, I believe Angela Kramer was good enough to put something in the chat for that.
Did, yeah.
Yeah.
And we did a program on Hattie Sewell, and the Friends of Pierce Mill have a really
Mhm.
wonderful documentary, the content of which was expressed in the program that we did with Friends of Pierce Mill as well. It's a really great story, and I'm looking forward to having a tea house by the creek at some point in my life. That would be a fun thing to bring back, since you're saying yes to everything now, apparently, Brian. I have you recorded saying that.
You do have me recorded.
What about the barn?
And this will be our final question, and then we'll do sort of quick statements. But we had a question: what animal wildlife was present initially that is no longer in the park?
Wolves.
Bison.
Well, it's interesting because you could talk about the deer and how there used to not be deer.
Mhm.
The park in the 60s and 70s would have these observation cards, and they would fill one out if they saw a deer in the park. And then after a certain amount of time, they just stopped filling out the observation cards for a deer because, of course, the deer just realized this is a great place to be and we want to hang out here, and hung out there for many years before the Park Service was able to do some studies to figure out how do we manage that, because they significantly changed the forest in the park.
I think one of the hard things to factor it is if you do, and particularly those of us who get our food from a grocery store, apex predators have a role in in the ecosystem, and the deers don't have any. So.
Excellent. Well, certainly managing natural resources in the 21st century and in the context of climate change is no simple matter, and in a densely urbanized area. But I will say, I think Rock Creek is working hard on doing that as well. Joan or Brian, this has been a really wonderful and rich discussion. Thank you. Also, shout out to Kyle Yaruso, the Volunteer and Youth Programs Coordinator for the park, who's been adding some great resources to the chat. Thank you for that. And thank you to everyone who has both asked questions, but also added comments or provided resources to each other. It really is a beautiful community that we are, that we have here in Rock Creek. Joan, do you want to say anything in parting?
Thank you very much for letting me be here. It was great having this conversation. I hope that people have an appreciation for administrative histories, that they aren't just a doorstep, which is how they were used to be considered way back in the 70s and 80s, and that actually they are useful. Brian is laughing. They are useful documents that can be read and used not just by park managers, but by everyday people. I encourage you to pick out your favorite park and find the admin history for it. You'll learn a lot of interesting stuff from it. Pardon?
I said, you mean Rock Creek.
Oh, right.
Your second or third favorite park, you should check out those as well.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to cut you off, Joan.
No, that's fine. Yep, I'm done.
All right. Brian, do you want to add anything in closing, and then I'll take the final word?
So I appreciate everyone who joined and provided questions, and I do like the phrase you use, that we have a nice community of people here working together, looking at people answering each other's questions in the chat. That's really nice. And I'm just really excited about the chances here and talk with Joan. When I was working in a headquarters and working in cultural resources, you know, those people who got the right books, big books, weighty books, for more than just holding doors open, but we got to write those things, like were my heroes. So, you know, it was nice having a chance to do this with Joan. I've known Joan for several years. It's been very, very, very fulfilling to see the sort of work that I used to do in Washington in headquarters, and always ask the questions like, does this stuff actually mean something in the park? And I can say, yes, it does. You know, and this is, so it's nice to be able to talk a little bit about that. And I apologize to anyone who was bored by the geeky conversation about developing administrative histories early on. But it is a fascinating piece of work to look back on how we got to here. I think it's really worthwhile. So thank you, Joan, for your time.
Oh, thank you. Yep.
Well, on behalf of Rock Creek Conservancy, thank you both for giving us a slice of your evening. Thanks to this entire community for giving us a bit of your evenings as well. Certainly, as we all seek to be great stewards of Rock Creek and really make sure that it is here for the next, you know, we want it to have a third administrative history because it goes on for so long. It does take that collective effort. The other Friends groups like Friends of Pierce Mill and Washington Parks and People that have been mentioned, Friends of Georgetown Waterfront Park. It takes all of us making great choices as we visit the park and bring others to visit the park. It also, we rely on the support of all of you, whether it's by paying your taxes on time so the National Park Service has its operating budget, or through the philanthropic support of the Conservancy or one of the other philanthropic partners of Rock Creek Park. But I would also say this sense of community that we saw tonight, it's really wonderful when that transfers into the real world and, you know, everybody gets that feeling of welcome in the park and outside of the park as you're working your way there. If you love this program, please come back. We will be doing a program later this spring with Friends of Pierce Mill about the history of the Klingel family and their plantation and the people who did unpaid labor to make that possible. We're working on a few others that we aren't ready to announce yet. We'll have summer in the parks this summer at Carter Barron and Fort Slocum. And every Saturday morning, unless we have weather emergencies like we have the last few weeks, we are out there in one of our mini oases doing invasive plant removal and other volunteer work. So please, I promise you, if you're here tonight, you'll be getting lots of emails from us with opportunities to get more involved in Rock Creek, and we look forward to seeing all of you out there. And if you think this is just the absolute best thing you've ever done and you geeked out at every moment of this hour, maybe you want to be our next program director if you also happen to have some good project management and people management skills. If you're interested in that, on the Our Team page of our website, you can see the listing. We're looking for someone really wonderful to head our team. And with that, I will wish you all a good night. Go do great things. And thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good evening, everyone.